Women in your 30s and beyond, are you tired of being told how to feel? Like all of the products are forced on you? Doesn't it feel like these big companies categorize you when the truth is they don't know you? Listen up. I'm Dr. Jila, an OBGYN and women's health expert. This is my podcast, Her Time, Her Health with Dr. Jila. Good morning, Kayla. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I really want to start with, in your opinion, where do you think medicine is still underestimating women?
Oh, goodness. So many areas, unfortunately. I guess let's parse out underestimating women. I think we've made a lot of progress. Definitely the conversation online, maybe it's just my little sphere of Instagram and social media, but definitely seems to be elevating the conversation around women's health, menopause, perimenopause. These were conversations that were not being had at all. So I think we've definitely made significant progress. Actually, how exciting, you and I met at the longevity conference where it was majority female physicians, right? I was speaking there, which was so fun and exciting. But even the fact that we're having events like that, with women, for women, by women, I love it. But we also still have a really big gap to close. Women weren't required to be included in the medical research until about 1993. I was about 3 years old, so it's not been that long. Still about 2/3 of women or 2/3 of studies are on men. And we know that women have unique longevity hurdles, in my opinion. 80% of autoimmune conditions being women, 2/3 of Alzheimer's being women, cardiovascular events happening in a different way, sometimes being dismissed in the emergency room. It's funny that women, I think, are 51% of the population, but correct me if I'm wrong, when a woman presents with a, cardiovascular event in the ER, they would deem that as, the minority even, or an what would be the term for this? Basically out of the norm event, even though we're 51% of the population. So, right. We have a lot to make up for, but I feel like the passion is there and the conversation is there, which I'm very excited about.
Yeah. And, to your point, women in the ER in terms of cardiovascular events, they're looked at as hysterics or a psychiatric issue or other things, anything other than what it actually could be. And are sent home sometimes. And, they have to go back 2 or 3 times in order to really get the full evaluation that they should be having. And we know in peri and postmenopausal women, cardiovascular disease is the number one risk factor for mortality for them. So we have a lot of work to be done, but it is happening and it is moving in the right direction. And I'm kind of excited for us all to be a part of this movement and to actually be here seeing it. And, for some, like your generation of women, we're moving the needle where care and health options for them are going to be so much different in the future. And I think that's where all the excitement lies right now, is all of this improvement and moving in that direction. One of the questions I always, reflect on in my own work is, what is something women are being told that's normal, right? But we actually believe is an early sign of something else. What do you think those signs are?
Yeah. I think from a conventional medicine standpoint, it's so many things. Having insulin over 6 would probably be normal, right? Having glucose that is, 90, 95 or 98, you fall within that normal range, but you are clearly moving in a direction that can be catastrophic later, TPO antibodies, that's another one that I would say, it's normal until it's not. And we know that these diseases, and for anyone that's listening, the insulin and the glucose, you're moving towards metabolic dysfunction. You can be moving towards prediabetes, obviously moving towards diabetes from, some of these lab markers. They're so indicative of where you could go. The TPO antibodies, if you have them present, we know you could be moving towards the direction of an autoimmune condition like Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So I think in so many different lab ranges in conventional medicine, we're still not quite there where we're saying, oh, you're normal. And then all of a sudden overnight, supposedly at your next doctor's visit, you have now developed this chronic disease. So I'm very excited for hopefully that to change. There's so many new longevity physicians and resources out there for women that can catch these things so much earlier. But obviously, as it relates to longevity, it's so important to be monitoring labs and then catching things early when you can do, some pretty significant, in my opinion, improvements or, really make progress on putting this in a better place.
And I like that you said that, because there are so many markers out there that more refined biomarkers, I should say, because like a hemoglobin A1C is a standard that we've been taught to use in conventional medicine, but we know there, fasting insulin and fasting glucose ratio, the HOMO-IR, is a much more indicative marker of insulin resistance leading to prediabetes and diabetes eventually. So you can actually catch things so much earlier. There's cardiac biomarkers. And with that, let's talk about ovarian biomarkers and checking and things like that. Like in your role, you've spent years studying female longevity. What initially drew your attention into the field of female longevity, number one? And number two, how does your work with Timeless Biotech kind of, tie into all of that?
Yeah. Well, it started off just general longevity, and I would say health optimization more than anything. I initially started studying nutrition in college. I grew up on a very standard American diet. So people kind of see my life now, and I have a hyperbaric chamber behind me, and they think that maybe I grew up, super healthy and wealthy and all the things. And that's just simply not the case. Grew up on Pop-Tarts and Reese Puffs and all these foods that I would now deem food-like substances. But when I, moved out and I decided that I really wanted to create a different life than I had, I knew I was going to have to upgrade, my brain health and my biology in order to really be able to work the hours that I needed to work to build something great. So the initial entrance in, let's say, human optimization was just how can I, be more optimal with work because I want to build this amazing life. So that in combination with studying nutrition, it was kind of like the initial fire that was lit, that it was like, okay, I feel so much better just by changing what I'm eating from that Pop-Tarts and those processed foods, ultra processed foods, to more of a whole foods diet. I felt so much better. And then I started to just dive a little deeper. When I say I wanted to improve my brain health, I found Dr. Daniel Amen and started, doing his brain health practitioner certification. I completed that, completed IIN, completed, IHP, all these different programs just to improve my own health, truly. And then I got really deep in the weeds in about 2018, which is when I went to go open up this longevity medicine clinic. And one of the first things to do was hire, a provider and decide what services we would offer. And so after hiring a medical doctor, I all of a sudden overnight had access to thousands and thousands of labs. All of which truly a doctor had never recommended that I do before. I was in my 20s. So, all my physicians were like, oh, everything looks great. Keep going where you're going. But once I started to dig a little deeper, gut testing and thyroid testing, like advanced thyroid testing and advanced cardiovascular panels and, total toxic burdens and biological age and all this stuff, I was like, wow, there's so much room for improvement here. And I just absolutely loved that. And then parallel to that, I was also determining what services we would offer. So I got really deep in the weeds on hyperbaric and what does the research say? And what do other, clinic owners say or providers say? So I became so many of these resources became available. And I asked the new team that I'd hired, can you create the most science-backed longevity protocol for me possible? And they did. And some of the interventions that were included in that protocol were things like caloric restriction, right? So we've seen in mice and worms that this is one of the only things that has actually been proven to extend lifespan. So we added in caloric restriction there. And as a woman that was already lean, adding in this about 20, because we wanted to add between 20 and 30% caloric restriction because that's what they were using in the studies. And it yielded about 20 to 30% increase in lifespan. So I implemented that, and I felt great for a few months, but after that, I started to watch my thyroid decline. I started, seeing, irregularities in my cycle. It became delayed. And so that was when I took a step back and said, okay, this is, let's say, great science on longevity, but it doesn't seem to be working for me. And I wonder why. So at that point, I hired a small team of female PhD candidates and researchers to pull all of the female specific longevity research. There wasn't a ton. There's still not a ton. I mean, I have Google alerts from everything, Google Scholar, PubMed, etc. And it's super rare that a study actually sends me an alert that's, valuable, to be honest, because they're just so limited still. And so implemented those changes into my protocols, brought both like the randomized control side of it, and then also the clinician side of things, and said, okay, let's rework this protocol for a woman that is in menstruating years, which is where I'm at, So, and that was really the aha moment for me, where I was like, okay, maybe women shouldn't be doing all the same things as men. And I'm not saying that there's not similarities, because there's most certainly is, right? But that was when I wanted to just dive deeper into female longevity specifically. And over the years of doing that, and I also would like to say, as you know this, yes, there are nuance between men and women, but there's also nuance between individuals, right? So I would always say step one of building your longevity protocol as a woman is determining your risk. So looking at family history, looking at your genetics, and looking at your current blood work. So for me, I have an increased risk of cardiovascular disease. I have an elevated Lp(a), which for anyone listening is, a cardiovascular marker that's primarily genetic. So for me, that goes to the very top. And then we also can combine that with female specific longevity risks, I would say. So things like autoimmune condition, things like bone density, muscle mass, losing muscle mass, even metabolic disorders. To me, those are more significant on the female side. So yeah, that's kind of what got me interested in it. And just over the years, I've really felt like I've had the opportunity to refine it. So what I have done, I actually exited my clinic. I owned and operated that and ran it for, 5-6 years, and left last year. And now I've really put this amazing board of advisors that are female physicians, researchers for each area of female health. So working with like Dr. Sarah Zoll-Gottfried on, female longevity generally, and then Dr. Deanna Minich on some nutrition protocols. And I've just really had the firsthand experience and seeing all the labs. Like, this really seems to work for women. This might not work as well. And to come along on the ovarian aging, for me, on the longevity risks, outside of the cardiovascular disease that we know is one of my top personal risks, ovarian longevity is like the very top. Because we know that the ovaries are kind of a pacemaker for longevity. So if you enter menopause early, we know that when you enter menopause, the risk of all-cause mortality increases, substantially, from cardiovascular disease to dementias, et cetera. So I think if we can delay that, menopause, push that back a little bit and have, better ovarian longevity, that will be a game changer for women overall. And Timeless is super exciting because they are the first, it's called time to menopause prediction. So they're actually looking at when you might enter menopause. And my mom entered, the best marker that we have as of now is, when did your mother go into menopause? And my mom went into menopause about 5 years early. So she went into menopause about 47, but we live very different lives. So I would hope that I would not be on that same trajectory. But up until now, until getting this test, I really didn't know. So I am the first woman to publicly do it. From what I understand about the technology is it was trained, and AI has made this possible. And I think AI is just going to revolutionize medicine, radiology, longevity, everything at this point, drug development. So excited about what AI can do. And this is like the tip of the iceberg for female health, I think, because now this machine learning model has been trained on over 40,000 non-theoretical data points. So real labs from real women with endpoints of when they entered menopause. And the test is actually a standard biomarker. So it's looking at AMH, which is the ovarian reserve, and it's looking at estrogen levels. It's looking at FSH, some self-report data as well. So things like body mass and, periods and how often you have them and if they're regular. And then it runs over, I think, 100,000 clinical. Kieran, the CEO, could speak to this a bit better than I, but from what I understand, over 100,000 different kind of formulas to determine not just these numbers, because we know that one woman's estrogen can be normal, whereas that same estrogen level in another woman can be low or high. So this is looking at all of these different scenarios within your own data and how they're interplaying together, which I think is super exciting. So we haven't had a biomarker to actually measure interventions for ovarian aging in women. For example, like my first thing, now that I have my baseline, and we can talk about in a second what my baseline was, I can actually use that and then remove all other interventions and now just do 40 sessions of hyperbaric, then retest. And then we can see, okay, do we think that hyperbaric has any positive impact on ovarian aging? So I'm super excited for that reason.
Yeah, I remember when you discussed this at the Her Longevity Conference back in October in New York. And I had already spoken to Timeless at that point, and we were already on board with the upcoming testing. And we've actually had Kieran on the show. And so we did go through the thing and through all of the, the background of the test and what we're hoping to achieve for women. Because listen, I see women on a daily basis. I've been taking care of them for over 25 years, but now in a different capacity as going more into their longevity and holistic health, not just looking at one aspect of it, but really bringing the whole picture in as a whole to them, because women are investing in their health now. They're understanding what interventions can and will do for them if they commit to it. And that really they should be more proactive rather than being reactive, which is what we've always been told, wait to have a problem and then treat it, rather than, hey, why don't we just try and prevent it altogether just so we can live longer? So to kind of tie this in for them in terms of the ovarian, because I do see, I originally started my women's health clinic for midlife women going through perimenopause and menopause. But what's happened is, I think based on, trailblazers and thought leaders like yourself in the field, I'm getting a lot of 30-year-old patients now who are coming to me to be proactive for their health. They tell me, I say, why are you here and how can I help you? And they're like, I'm done having kids, or that isn't what I really want to be focusing on at this point. I want to know what to do to optimize myself. And that way I don't have problems that I've seen happen in my mom or my sisters or my family members. And so for me, it's shifted everything of what I've known into what I'm doing now. And it's really amazing to watch what's coming, especially with AI and all of this mix that we have available to us. And, it's kind of crazy, but I see the improvements and I see the things happening, and women are so excited. Okay, tell me about the ovarian aging and what do I have to do? And I told them it's really blood work that we're already doing. We're just going to add the other component from you, and then we're going to talk about the report and what we need to do to shift and change. So what I can say is women like data points. They like knowing what's going on with themselves and what they can do to change it.
I love that. And I feel like we're in a more empowered position than we ever have been. I'm doing so many biomarkers at home, things like grip strength and VO2 max training, two really important ones for women. I'm looking at, you can look at your hormones. These are urinary metabolites on a daily basis, but we have the ability to do things like this. I just saw that, I haven't tried it yet, but I'm so excited about it. There's a wearable that is apparently able to now track your hormones on a day-to-day basis, which is super exciting. So we're living in a great time. And, first is the information and understanding. We know that bone density, for example, which is so incredibly important to women because we become frail, much easier than our male counterparts, that it peaks at about age 30, but most women aren't even getting it looked at until 65 when it's covered by insurance. So now that information is out there, you can get a DEXA scan, which is, maybe it's $60 to $100 depending on where you live. And you can actually make improvements in this area of your health. And if we do that for each area of health that we know will decline, I think we just have the ability to live such healthier lives. Women on average live between 5 and 7 years longer than men. So we kind of already have longevity a little bit sorted out, but we live in poorer health for longer. So the goal is, how can we improve that health span?
Absolutely. And let's kind of, zoom out for a minute. Are women truly being prepared for this longevity, or are they just kind of like surviving into it?
I think as a whole, we're still not. I mean, I think you and I probably live in a very small bubble, where everybody that we know is doing all the advanced labs and
Right.
we're, getting Pronuvo scans and maybe like soft plaque analysis and all this stuff. But I think as a whole, the reality is that many women are still not, getting the level of care that they probably need. I mean, if we think about it, hormone therapy just had the black box label or warning removed, right? So
Right.
there was an entire generation of physicians and women. My mom is 53, and she went, into menopause. And I told her, I said, Mom, here's all the data. You should be on hormone therapy. She went to her doctor to request it. He said, absolutely not. This will give you cancer. And this is like last year. So this is not a long time ago. And then, she ended up going to the clinic that I previously had, and she got hormone therapy. But there's still leaps and bounds that we need to do in terms of education. And then I think it's really difficult for women to navigate finding a provider as well that will, prescribe them something like a hormone therapy or has had training on that. So I think, we're moving in the right direction, but we still have quite a ways to go.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more with you on that. And I was hoping that your mom went to your clinic. I was like, I hope your mom went to your clinic and you took care of it. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
What silent changes do you think women's, body deserves to kind of like they need to tune into these silent signals that they're being given that they're not focusing on at all? Like what things have you seen?
Yeah. I think one of the first shifts that tends to occur is actually metabolic changes. And I would love to hear your opinion on that. So we talked about this kind of in the opening of the podcast, but things like insulin, requesting to have your insulin looked at instead of just, your HbA1c, which is probably more on a standard lab. And you know what? I kind of did this experiment too. So when I moved to Austin, obviously I have a whole host of my own doctors, right? I went to a PCP, and I'm not saying this will be the case in every case, but I came really prepared with the labs that I specifically wanted, and I gave them to her, and I had no relationship with her. She didn't know who I was, et cetera. It was like standard doctor's visit, but I explained why I wanted certain things, and I gave her a list, and she actually called in most of them for me. So not saying that that's going to happen all the time, but for anyone that's listening and can't go access a longevity or concierge doctor, at least requesting some of these things can be helpful. So looking at, HOMA IR, fasting insulin. I'm usually wanting to keep my fasting insulin at about 4, 4 or 5, I think is a good range. Would love to hear your opinion, but some of those metabolic changes that start happening early, I think is super important. Also, muscle mass. I would say getting a DEXA scan, understanding where your muscle mass is, because we know we can do a lot about this. Increasing your protein a bit, hitting the gym hard, adding on that muscle mass. So we're preparing for our older age now. Same thing with bone density. Or even if you don't look at the number, incorporate bone density training into your workouts now. So I do a lot of jumping, a lot of box jumping, compound lifting, really weighting the bones, ensuring that my vitamin D levels are optimal, my minerals are optimal. These all contribute to optimal bone health. I think those are a few areas I would definitely start looking at. And then also, obviously hormonal changes. We know that some women, not all women, are going into menopause earlier, perimenopause earlier, entering menstruation earlier. And I think that if we start to look at those changes, how long is the second half of your cycle, your luteal phase? Is there any changes there? How are your sleep patterns? Are you seeing differences or changes in sleep? We know sleep will vary a bit throughout the cycle, but are you seeing any substantial changes there? I think being in tune with our bodies is really overlooked, because if you feel shifts and you start journaling them, I really try to just sit with my body for, 20 minutes in the morning and say, like, how am I feeling? I look at my Oura Ring data. How did I sleep? Is anything different? Oh, my resting heart rate's been elevated for a few days or something of that nature. What's going on there? So I think being in tune is super important too. But I would say hormonal shifts, the muscle, the bone, the metabolic changes, really paying attention to those as much as you can.
Yeah, I completely agree in terms of looking at deeper data. And I do run a lot, I changed my whole lab panel of what I used to draw and what I have. And it keeps expanding, to be honest with you, the more I research and learn. And again, we're always learning, as you know, none of this stuff is, there's more and more coming out. And so I'm always updating the panel, but the HOMA IR is really where it's at for me as well. I do love to keep the fasting glucose and insulin as low as possible. I don't think my patients are at the level of 4 yet, but we're kind of with nutrition and different modifications, we're getting them there. But also the cardiovascular biomarkers, I really love looking at those and explaining them to my patients. Coming from an OBGYN background, for them, they're like, how do you know about cardiovascular biomarkers and disease? And what are we doing here? I said, I'm trying to be preventative for you because most of the time you're all pretty healthy at this point, and I'd love to keep it that way. And if I find something, an ApoB that's elevated or lipoprotein little a, then I will do further testing with, not even just an EKG, but I go as far as the carotid artery, intimal thickening, and I do calcium scores and things like that to really get data for them before just prescribing things or, kind of this is how we build their healthcare plan together going forward for them and show them those changes, when I see them back in, 2 to 3 months, and what did we change and how do we, initiate all of these things that we talked about, and did we follow through on? I really like to hold them accountable. And so we have a lot of touch points for the patients who come in with us, and they're not used to it. They're coming from conventional offices, and I'm kind of retraining them. I'm not an OBGYN. I'm your gynecologist. I'm your women's health provider. So whatever that entails, that's what we're going to talk about. You want to talk about exercise regimens? I have people who will build a regimen for you that's appropriate for you. And it's funny that you talked about the bone density and the muscle mass, because like I said, my daughter was here over the holidays, and my kids hear me. They're in their 20s, so they hear everything I'm doing. And my boys are definitely very, very well versed in women's health. So, for them, it's going to be, whoever ends up with them, they're going to be fine with that. But my daughter is really digging into it, and she saw I have an InBody at the office, and she's like, I want to try this. I said, I think you should. Let's check you out, because, she's young and she's always worried about weight, this, that. And I said, it's really more important than just a number. I think you need to focus on muscle mass and fat component, things like that. I said, let's check it. And she, when I printed the report for her, she was shocked. She's like, what does this mean? I said, well, this is what visceral fat looks like, and this is what muscle is, and this is what you need to do. And literally she went back to Dallas, found herself a trainer to help her with weight training, because she's been a runner all her life. But again, she's 20 years old, she doesn't, she does Pilates and this and that. And I said, you need to do actual weights. You need resistance training, and you need to do it with somebody who will help you learn those movements. You can't just walk into a gym and start lifting. You're going to hurt yourself. And again, I'm always a mom too, like I don't know anything. Not really, they don't take it from me that well. But she went to the trainer, and the trainer pretty much explained everything I just had told her. And they did another InBody. A month later, she goes back and redoes it. And she's like, send me the report. I want to compare. And she had already shifted and built some muscle just by eating well and doing the things that we're talking about. And it clicked for her. It clicked so much so that she sends me a diary of her food every day now. Look what I ate. And is this enough protein? And where else can I get protein? And this and that. So that's really a testament to seeing how younger generations are looking at all of this and what's out there. And let me tell you, they're like, they stay away from alcohol. They're not doing certain things. She's paying attention to her sleep. She's walking after she eats. These are things that I'm talking about, but I guess it's resonating with the younger population. And that's what really gives me hope. And I'm sure it's giving you, excitement with everything that you have kind of built out and you're on the path that your journey is. It's really inspiring to hear. Every time I hear you speak, I'm like, yep, this is why, people need to hear Kayla, because you're coming from a whole different background. You're just coming as a regular individual who saw what was going on and you did something about it, but on a huge scale. So I see all of that resonating and just building out. And it's really exciting to see women learning from all of this and implementing it for themselves. And, it's one little change daily. I think those little habits on a daily basis that are going to add up and have additive effect down the road.
Absolutely. And, I am the most publicly measured woman. I put out thousands and thousands of biomarkers and data and all this stuff. And I do a lot of pretty intense stuff, right? I mean, it's funny that like peptides are popular now because I've been doing peptides for over a decade, continuous glucose monitors, red light therapy, all this stuff. When I first started, it would take like an hour to explain what I did to people and they still didn't really get it. Now I'm in the longevity industry and they're like, oh, amazing. And it's like, everybody knows. But at the end of the day, the habits that are most impactful are definitely the mastering the basics. Sleep. And then there's nuance for women in almost every category that I have found. So, sleep, women need more sleep than men. The data says about between 11 and 15 minutes. I think Oura Ring, which is the largest data set on women, is, saying about 20 to 30 minutes throughout your cycle. That can even change. You might need a little bit more sleep in late luteal or early menstruation, but prioritizing sleep. For me, stress reduction goes super high for women in my personal protocol, because we know that women report higher levels of anxiety, stress, depression. And I can see from a physiological level on my Oura Ring that even though my cortisol is not necessarily elevated, I have higher baseline levels of physiological stress than, for example, my husband. And when I talk to women, we all see the same thing. If you've ever looked at your husband's ring, he has more responsibility than me. He's, responsible for the house and all the things, but he's in restored all day. It's amazing. Yeah. I'm like, how do you do this? But women we're built different. We think about, we're more interpersonal, relationship based, and there's just differences. So if you can master the basics, yes, NED is exciting, and yes, peptides are exciting, and yes, red light therapy and hyperbaric, these things can definitely give you that small edge. And also if you're really sick, I saw this all the time in my clinic. These therapies can help get you to a more well place faster, but you have to master the basics. And that is exercise, stress reduction, nutrition, social connection. I would also say, of course, sleep, maybe environment optimization a bit, maybe air purification, things like that, looking at what the environment is that you're living in, but you have to master those and you're going to be healthier than, 98% of people just by mastering the basics.
Exactly. Yeah. Everybody wants a quick fix, but if they really hone in on the basics, I think that's where, they're going to get the biggest bang for their buck per se, So yeah, they always want to jump to the next thing. And I said, let's fix the bottom first and then we'll build on that. When you look ahead 20 to 30 years from now, what do you hope women today will one day thank themselves for starting earlier?
Adding muscle and improving bone density, to be honest. Those two things are really going to keep us significantly less frail. And we know that it's catastrophic. Let's say, for example, if you fall and break a hip, as a woman, the mortality rates, I can't recall the exact number, but it's incredibly high of not making it past that first year. So we have to maintain muscle, maintain bone. So if you start that earlier or start now, I don't believe that there's ever a time that it's too late to start, but it's also never too early, in my opinion.
Correct. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. So I ask every guest this question. If a woman listening today can make just one decision that her future self will thank her for, what do you think it would be?
I would say, this is hard because there's so many tips I want to give.
I know. You can give as many as you want.
Okay. I'll say first thing I always like to say is go to bed early. Because I think prioritizing sleep is one of the most important things that we can do for longevity for so many reasons. One poor night of sleep, increases your hunger hormone ghrelin. So you'll literally have more cravings the next day. You'll be less adherent to your nutritional protocol. It decreases your natural killer cells. So, cells that are fighting off cancer. It can impede hormone production, which we certainly don't want as women. And overall, we're going to have less adherence to those healthy habits. Sleep is just the foundation. I think that is really important. And also getting good biomarkers on yourself so that you can actually develop a bio-individual longevity plan. So you know where your biggest pitfalls are going to be. If you have really low muscle mass, that needs to go to the top. If you have super high LP little a and ApoB, we know cardiovascular health goes to the top. It can be really overwhelming, and there's so many things that we could be doing. So I think understanding your personal risk is going to give you, the most bang for your buck for the future.
Perfect. So Kayla, thank you again so much for being with us today. Where can our audience learn more about you and follow you and find you?
Thank you so much for having me. And you can follow me on all social media platforms. So Instagram at Kayla Barnes, YouTube. I do a lot of long form content. You can see morning routines, evening routines, labs, things of that nature. I also have a podcast that we'll have to get you on at some point called Longevity Optimization. And it's all it's medical doctors and PhDs, and we're all talking about health, women's health in particular. And you can also find my entire protocol.kaylabarnes.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And yes, we will be putting all that in the show notes. That way everybody can be able to follow you and learn more from you. Thank you so much again.
Thanks so much for having me.